It was last October, one of those warm, early fall nights where the air feels heavy with the last remnants of summer. I live just outside Chicago, in a quiet neighborhood filled with those skinny, brick apartment buildings. That night, the streets smelled faintly of rain on concrete, sharp and metallic, and the trees rattled dry leaves in the wind. I hadn't been on a date in months, but Tinder always felt like the easiest way to break the silence when I got lonely. That's how I met her, Emily. She had this soft, unassuming profile, a candid picture of her holding coffee, a short bio about loving poetry and long walks by the lake. Nothing flashy. Normal. Safe. We messaged for about a week before she suggested we grab a drink. I picked a small bar near my apartment, the kind with dim lighting and cracked leather booths that smell faintly of spilled whiskey and lemon oil from decades of half-hearted cleanings. She was already there when I arrived, seated in the corner, half hidden in the shadows. She looked just like her pictures, but somehow, more still. Her posture, her expression, everything about her seemed perfectly controlled, like she was holding her breath without realizing it. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi, Marcus." I froze a little. I hadn't told her my real name yet. On the app, I always went by Mark, it just felt more casual. But I brushed it off, assuming maybe I'd slipped at some point in our messages. We ordered drinks and talked. She asked me all the usual first date questions, what I did for work, where I grew up, my favorite movies. But every time I answered, she'd already know. I'd say, "I work in marketing," and she'd nod and add, "At that small firm in the West Loop, right?" Or I'd mention my dog, and she'd interrupt with, "Yeah, the black lab mix. What's his name again? Jasper?" At first, I laughed it off. Maybe I had been more open in my profile than I thought. Maybe I'd told her in chat and just forgotten. But the more it kept happening, the harder it became to convince myself. The air inside the bar felt warmer, thicker. I kept running my hand along the condensation on my glass just to give myself something to do. Then she said something that made my stomach knot. "So, how's your mom doing? I know she's been having a hard time." I hadn't told anyone about that. Not online. Not even most of my friends. My mom had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder just a few weeks earlier. I hadn't posted about it anywhere. My voice came out quieter than I intended. "How do you know that?" Emily tilted her head, like she was genuinely confused by the question. "You told me." But I hadn't. Suddenly, every sound in the bar, the muted laughter, the clink of ice in glasses, felt like it was coming from far away, underwater. I don't think I did," I said. She smiled again, but there was something wrong with it this time. Something stretched too thin. "You don't remember, but you did." I forced a laugh and checked my phone, pretending I'd gotten a message. I mumbled something about needing to head out soon, but she just kept watching me, her eyes dark and steady. Then she said it. "Are you going to walk home, or take the 22 like you usually do?" My heart practically stopped. That was my exact bus route. I never mentioned that to her. Not online. Not tonight. Nowhere. The panic must have shown on my face because she leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I like your apartment, by the way. The corner unit with all the plants in the window." I pushed back from the table so fast I almost knocked my drink over. My legs felt like they barely worked as I stood up. She just sat there, still smiling that thin, placid smile. Outside, the night air was cold against my face, and for a second I just stood on the sidewalk, trying to steady my breathing. I glanced through the bar's window. She wasn't there. I scanned up and down the street. Empty. No sound except the low hum of streetlights and the rustling of dry leaves tumbling along the pavement. I walked home that night. I didn't even think about waiting for the bus. Every step, I kept checking behind me, sure that I'd hear her footsteps or see her reflection in a dark window. But there was nothing. When I got back to my building, I locked the door behind me and shut all the blinds. I even moved a chair under the doorknob, like I used to do as a kid when I was home alone. For hours, I just sat there, listening to the soft creaks of the building settling, the distant sounds of the city. The next morning, I opened Tinder to block her, or at least try to make sense of it. But her profile was gone. Like it had never existed. I checked our chat history. Empty. No messages. Not even a record of the match. For days afterward, I kept thinking I saw her out of the corner of my eye, a dark shape sitting alone at a bus stop, a woman standing still at the end of an alley, but every time I turned to look, it wasn't her. Or maybe it was, and I just didn't recognize her without that smile. I don't use dating apps anymore. And I moved. New neighborhood, new apartment. No plants in the window. But sometimes, when I'm walking home late at night, I get this strange feeling. Like someone is watching me from a shadow just out of reach. Someone who already knows everything about me. I don't usually meet people from dating apps in person. Not because I'm shy, but there's always this nagging voice reminding me how little we really know about someone from a handful of pictures and a curated bio. But that night, late October, when the air already smelled faintly of frost and dead leaves, I made an exception. His name was Ethan. We'd matched about a week prior. He was charming, funny without trying too hard, and seemed genuinely interested in more than surface-level banter. His photos looked candid, natural, no filters, no group shots. Just him, usually outdoors, hiking, sitting on a cabin porch, even one where he was splitting wood. I don't know what it was exactly, maybe the season, the loneliness that creeps in when it starts getting dark too early, but when he suggested I come by for dinner at his place, I didn't hesitate as much as I normally would. He lived just outside town, in one of those older houses with wide, sagging porches and too much land. The kind of place that feels peaceful at dusk but unnervingly isolated once night fully settles. I remember the sound of gravel under my tires as I pulled up, the dense tree line hemming the property in on all sides, like the house was being swallowed by the woods. The porch light was on, but barely, more of a dull amber glow than anything welcoming. He opened the door before I could even knock. "Hey," he said, smiling, leaning casually against the frame. I smiled back. "Hey." Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood smoke and something cooking, something rich and savory. It put me at ease. He was warm, attentive, almost disarmingly normal. We had wine, ate the pasta he'd made from scratch, and for a while I forgot about the isolation, the towering dark trees just beyond the windows. But then, somewhere between our second glass of wine and him showing me the shelves of old records he'd collected, I heard it. A noise. Not loud, but distinct. A soft thud, then what sounded like a dragging sound. Faint, but deliberate. I froze, mid-sentence. He didn't. Instead, he smiled at me, just a bit too quickly, and said, "The house settles a lot. It's old." I nodded, because what else do you say? But I couldn't ignore how his eyes flicked toward the far end of the hallway when he said it. A hallway that led to a door I hadn't noticed before, half hidden in shadow, with an old brass handle. Another sound. This time, more like a shuffle. I laughed nervously. "You sure you don't have, like, raccoons in the basement or something?" He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "There's no basement." His voice was flat. Final. I looked at the door again. "Oh. I just assumed." He shook his head, standing up abruptly. "Want to hear a record?" I agreed, though my curiosity was gnawing at me now, sharp and insistent. As he flipped through vinyls, making small talk about obscure folk bands, I couldn't stop glancing toward that hallway. The rest of the evening passed in this strange limbo, him acting perfectly relaxed, me unable to shake the feeling that something, or someone, was behind that door. Eventually, it got late, and I said I should probably head home. He offered to walk me to my car, but I declined. I needed space. I needed air. As I stepped out onto the porch, I realized I'd left my scarf inside. I went back, calling over my shoulder, just grabbing my scarf. No answer. The house felt different. The lights seemed dimmer. The fire in the hearth had burned down to coals. I spotted my scarf draped over the back of the chair in the dining room, grabbed it, and as I turned to leave, that same sound echoed again from the hallway. But this time, a voice followed it. Soft, hoarse. Almost pleading. Help. I froze, my whole body buzzing with cold adrenaline. Ethan? I called out, but my voice barely carried. No answer. I edged closer to the hallway, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might faint. The door at the end of the hall, it was open now. Just a crack. From inside, I could hear shallow, ragged breathing. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I stepped closer, against all reason, my hand reaching out to push the door wider. It creaked loudly as it swung open. Beyond it, steep, narrow stairs descended into darkness. I could feel cold air seeping up from below, damp and sour, like earth and something older. Then, footsteps behind me. Heavy, fast. I whipped around, but too late. Ethan was there, face pale, eyes wide, not with anger, but something closer to panic. You weren't supposed to. His voice cut off as something from below growled. Yes, growled. Not human. Low, guttural, vibrating through the floorboards. He shoved the door closed so hard the frame shook, then snapped the deadbolt shut. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he looked at me, his voice almost a whisper. You need to go. I didn't ask questions. I didn't argue. I left, scarf clutched in my fist, legs shaking so badly I nearly stumbled down the porch steps. Driving away, my headlights caught his figure standing on the porch, arms crossed tightly over his chest, staring after me. I never heard from him again. His profile disappeared from the app the next day, like he'd never existed. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that voice from the basement. About what it was, or who it had been. And I wonder if I should have helped. But then I remember the sound that followed it. That low, animal growl. And I keep telling myself I did the right thing by leaving. I can't stop seeing that door in my mind. Half open. And something waiting just beyond it. It started on one of those humid, late summer nights when the air felt heavy, almost gelatinous, and my apartment windows refused to offer even a hint of a breeze. I live in a quiet part of town, just a few blocks from the river, where the streetlights flicker more than they glow, and the cicadas form an endless static in the background. I wasn't really looking for anything serious when I downloaded the app. Mostly just trying to fill the silence. Her name was Mara. Her profile wasn't like the others. There were only 3 photos. One, her sitting cross-legged on a faded quilt in what looked like a sunlit attic. Another, a candid shot of her reaching for something out of frame, her dark hair veiling most of her face. The third, a close-up of her hand pressed against an old, leaded glass window, smudged as if she'd leaned there for a long time. She didn't write much in her bio, just, let's not waste time. I don't know why that pulled me in, but it did. We matched almost instantly. She sent the first message, just one word. Hi. Something about the simplicity of it felt deliberate. Calculated, even. We chatted back and forth. She wasn't like the usual matches, there were no what do you do for work questions, no talk of favorite movies or weekend plans. Instead, she asked me strange things. Do you ever hear things when you're alone? Have you ever dreamt of someone you've never met? I remember lying on my bed, staring at my phone, her messages coming through one by one like small pebbles tossed into water, sending ripples through the otherwise calm of my evening. After a few days of this, she suggested we meet. I don't like waiting, she wrote. It was impulsive, but something about her, the way she kept the conversation just slightly out of reach, like there was always more she wasn't saying, made me agree. She gave me an address. Not a coffee shop or a bar, like I expected, but a house. On the edge of town, near the old train tracks that haven't been used in years. The night I went, the air was unnaturally still. Even the cicadas were quiet, as if they'd retreated somewhere I couldn't follow. The house was exactly where she said it would be, but it didn't look like anyone had lived there for a long time. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged, and there was a strange smell in the air, something metallic, like old pennies left in the rain. Still, my phone showed the exact address. I stood there on the sidewalk for a long time, considering turning around. But then my phone buzzed. "Come in." No other instructions. I should have left. Any rational person would have. But there was this hollow pull in my chest, like gravity, drawing me up the steps. The door wasn't locked. The moment I crossed the threshold, I swear the air inside changed. It was cold, despite the heat outside, and the house smelled even stronger of that metallic tang mixed with something else, dust, maybe, or something older. The only light came from the far end of the hallway, a faint, flickering glow. I called out her name. My voice sounded wrong in there, like it was being absorbed by the walls. No answer. I should have left. But I walked toward the light. The hallway felt too long, like it stretched farther with each step. My ears started ringing faintly, a high-pitched sound just on the edge of hearing, the kind that makes you want to swallow hard or pop your jaw. Finally, I reached the room at the end. It was empty, except for a single chair positioned in front of an old vanity mirror. On the seat, there was a phone, propped up perfectly, its screen facing outward. My stomach dropped when I saw the profile picture. It was Mara. But the screen was frozen. The app wasn't open. In fact, the phone itself wasn't even on. And then, reflected in the mirror behind the chair, I saw her. Standing there, just a few feet behind me. But when I spun around, the room was empty. The chair scraped across the floor by itself, just an inch or two, but enough to make the wood groan sharply against the warped floorboards. I didn't wait. I bolted out of the house, my footsteps loud and frantic, echoing through that too-long hallway, out the front door, down the steps. By the time I got to my car, my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely get the keys into the ignition. The next morning, I tried to find the profile again. But it was gone. Completely wiped. Not even in my match history. Like it had never existed. Out of morbid curiosity, or maybe something more like obsession, I went back to that part of town a few days later. The house was still there, but it was different. Boarded up. Overgrown with weeds. The whole front porch collapsed in on itself, like no one had touched it in years. I even looked up property records. The house had been abandoned for over 2 decades. Sometimes, late at night, when my apartment is still and the cicadas have gone quiet, I get the urge to check my phone again. To see if Mara's there. Waiting. But I haven't. Not yet. It was late last September, the kind of evening where the air feels thin and brittle, like something about to break. I'd gone upstate with my boyfriend, Mark, to spend the weekend away from the city, just the two of us, a little Airbnb cabin tucked in the Catskills. We'd driven up after work, winding through the dark country roads, that kind of black where your headlights only catch the mist and the occasional stretch of split-rail fence. The cabin itself was charming, all reclaimed wood and Edison bulbs, but after a while, the isolation pressed in. No cell service, no internet, just the sound of the trees creaking, like old doors swinging open in the wind. On the second night, after dinner, Mark suggested we go for a drive. I remember thinking it was odd, it was already past 9, and the roads out there weren't the kind you just meander down in the dark. But he was insistent in that quiet, offhand way of his, like it wasn't a suggestion so much as something that had already been decided. We got in the car and headed north, deeper into the woods. He didn't say much, just kept his eyes fixed ahead. I watched the trees blur past in the headlights, their branches hanging low, tangled like old veins. After a while, I realized I didn't recognize any of the turns we were taking. I asked him where we were going, and he just smiled, that kind of thin smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and said, "You'll see." I didn't press him. I wish I had. Eventually, the paved road gave way to gravel, then dirt. the trees grew closer together, pressing against the car on either side. It felt like we were being funneled somewhere, but I couldn't say where. There were no signs, no mile markers, nothing. Finally, Mark pulled over. We were in a clearing, if you could even call it that, just a bare patch of earth surrounded by dark pines. The air smelled sharp, almost metallic, and the only sound was the soft ticking of the car engine cooling. He got out without a word, walking towards a break in the trees. I hesitated, then followed. The path was narrow, barely visible, but he moved like he knew exactly where he was going. The ground beneath my boots was soft, almost spongy, and I kept getting caught on these low, creeping roots. The deeper we went, the quieter it got, not in that peaceful, natural way, but in a way that made you feel like everything was holding its breath. After maybe 15 minutes, we came to this structure. It was stone, or what looked like stone, but worn smooth like river rock, and arranged in this crude, circular shape. Not a house, not a monument, just a ring, maybe 20 feet across, sunk into the ground like it had always been there. Mark stepped right up to the edge of it, looking down into the center. I stayed back, unsettled by how silent he was, how deliberate his movements were. Then he said, quietly, "It doesn't show up on any maps." I asked him what he meant. He turned to me, his expression perfectly blank, and said, "Because it's not supposed to." Before I could even process that, he climbed down into the ring. I remember calling after him, but my voice felt swallowed by the trees. No echo, just, gone. He stood in the center for a moment, then looked up at me and said, "Come here." Something about the way he said it, I don't know. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even him, not really. I took a step forward, then another, until I was standing right at the edge, looking down. The ground inside was covered in moss and these small, pale stones, arranged almost like a pattern, though not one I recognized. The air was cold, colder than it should have been for September. I could see my breath, and when I exhaled, it hung there, motionless, like the air itself wasn't moving. Then I heard it. Not from Mark, not from the trees, but from beneath us. A sound like breathing. Long, slow, measured breaths, coming from under the earth. I froze, every part of me screaming to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Mark tilted his head, listening. Then he looked up at me again and smiled, this time wider, like he was in on some joke I could never understand. He said, "It's waking up." That was it. I turned and ran. I didn't even care about the path, I just shoved through the trees, branches tearing at my jacket, tripping over roots. I didn't stop until I saw the car through the trees, sitting exactly where we'd left it, the driver's door still hanging open. I jumped in and slammed the door, locking it, even though that made no sense. And then I waited. And waited. But Mark never came back. The forest was dead silent, like it had been sealed shut. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, or blacked out, because the next thing I remember is waking up to gray light seeping through the windshield. The door on Mark's side was closed. No sign of him. No footprints, nothing. I drove back to the cabin, half expecting to see him there, but of course he wasn't. I called the police, but when they went out to look, they said there was no dirt road like the one I described. No clearing. No ring of stones. They found the car's tire tracks ending in the middle of an overgrown field about 5 miles from the cabin, but that was it. I went home a few days later, alone. It's been almost a year now. I don't know what happened to Mark. Sometimes I wonder if he ever even existed at all. But some nights, when I'm alone and it's quiet enough, I swear I can still hear it, that slow, steady breathing, just beneath the floorboards. Like something, somewhere, is still waiting. It was late last November, one of those gray, windless evenings where the world feels muffled, like it's holding its breath. I was sitting at my desk in my apartment, a small studio tucked above a laundromat in a quiet neighborhood. The heater buzzed weakly, failing to push away the cold that seemed to seep through the walls. I wasn't doing anything special, just chatting with an old friend, Leo, on Discord. We hadn't spoken in months, and reconnecting felt good. The conversation was easy, familiar. We swapped memes, caught up on life, and complained about work. His profile picture was the same as it had always been, a blurry shot of him holding his cat, both of them squinting into the sun. It was one of those small, comforting details, you know, how people's profile pictures don't change for years, like little anchors in an otherwise shifting world. As we kept talking, I noticed a faint flicker in the corner of my screen. The kind of thing you'd ignore without a second thought. But then it happened again, this time longer, a kind of stutter where Leo's profile picture would glitch for a fraction of a second. His cat's face would stretch unnaturally, the colors warping, like a corrupted file. At first, I brushed it off. My internet wasn't great, especially at night when the building's other tenants were streaming movies or gaming. I even joked about it, typing, "LOL, your pic's breaking." He didn't respond to that directly. Instead, he asked, "You still live above that laundromat?" It felt like an odd pivot, but I went with it. I told him yeah, same place. I even added that the hum of the machines downstairs was kind of comforting now. And then, the flicker again. But this time, it didn't revert immediately. For maybe a second or two, his profile picture looked wrong. It was still him, but there were subtle distortions. His eyes were open too wide, the whites stark and unblinking. His mouth, God, it looked like it had been pulled into a grin that didn't belong to a human face. And behind him, instead of the sunny park I remembered, it was dark. Like the photo had been taken in a basement or a tunnel. Then it blinked back to normal. Just him and the cat, squinting into the light. My stomach tightened. I sat there, staring at the little circle on the screen, waiting for it to happen again. I even moved my mouse to make sure the app hadn't frozen, clicked into other chats to see if it was Discord acting up. Everything else was fine. And then Leo typed, "Why'd you change your picture?" I blinked. I hadn't. My profile picture was the same abstract black and white sketch it had been for years. "I didn't," I replied. Immediately, he typed back, "Yes you did. Looks weird." The second I read that, I clicked on my own profile out of instinct. But everything looked normal on my end. The same harmless image as always. I told him that. He didn't answer for a minute or two, which was odd because up until then our conversation had been constant, snappy. Then I saw he was typing. The little ellipsis pulsed on the screen. But no message came through. Instead, his profile picture changed. Not a flicker this time. A full, deliberate change. It was me. Not the sketch I always used, but a photo. A photo I'd never taken. It was me sitting at my desk, right there in my apartment, in that exact moment. The same cheap lamp to my left, casting the same weak light. The same chipped mug sitting on the windowsill. Except, in the photo, my head was turned slightly, like I was looking over my shoulder at something behind me. I sat frozen, the air around me turning colder, heavier. Slowly, I turned my head to look behind me, already knowing there wouldn't be anything there, but needing to check. And of course, there was nothing. Just the empty kitchenette, the shut bathroom door, and beyond that, the locked entrance to the apartment. When I turned back to my screen, another message from Leo had appeared. "You're not alone." My chest tightened so hard it felt like I couldn't breathe. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I pushed myself back from the desk, my chair scraping loudly across the floor. I wanted to call him, to hear his voice, to make sure this was some elaborate, twisted joke. But when I hovered over his profile to start a call, I saw that he was offline. Not idle. Not do not disturb. Just, gone. I stared at the chat window, at that awful photo of me, still set as his profile picture. Then, without any input from me, the chat window closed itself. Just vanished from the screen like it had never existed. I opened my friends list to find him, but there was no record of Leo anywhere. Not in my recent DMs, not in my server list, nowhere. Like I'd never spoken to him at all. The room felt colder than it should have. I sat there for a long time, just listening, to the faint sound of the dryers downstairs spinning, the occasional creak of the old building settling. That was months ago. I still don't know what happened that night. I've checked his old phone number, his social media, nothing. No trace. Sometimes, when I'm online late at night, I think about that profile picture, the one of me, looking just past the camera, at something I couldn't see. And every now and then, I swear I can feel that same cold air behind me, like someone standing just out of frame, waiting. It started on a quiet Thursday evening, just outside of town, at a little cafe nestled between a row of aging brick buildings. The kind of place where the hum of conversation mingled with the soft clinking of dishes and faint jazz drifting through cracked open windows. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee beans and old books from the shop next door. I was meeting someone new, a woman I'd been texting with for a few weeks, and we agreed on something simple, low-key. Nothing fancy. We sat outside under a dim string of yellow lights, the sky just slipping into dusk. She was easy to talk to, laughing softly, the kind of laugh that doesn't feel forced. There was an odd stillness to the night, though, like the world was holding its breath. No crickets, no breeze. Just silence around the edges. As we talked, I noticed the shadows stretching longer, deepening under the trees lining the street. Her eyes flicked to them now and then, like she felt something watching, but she didn't say anything. I asked her about it, and she smiled, brushing it off, said it was just the way the light was fading. After the cafe closed, we decided to walk a little. The streets were nearly empty, only a few cars passing by, their headlights cutting clean lines through the fog that had begun to roll in. It was thick, sticky, and smelled faintly like wet earth mixed with something I couldn't place, something metallic, sharp. We talked about nothing much, our jobs, favorite books, a movie she liked, trying to keep things normal. But I kept catching glimpses of movement in the fog. Flickers at the edge of my vision. Once, I thought I heard a whisper, soft and far away, like a breath across the back of my neck, but when I turned, there was nothing but swirling gray. She said she felt it too, this presence, and that maybe we should head back soon. I agreed. We turned the corner onto a narrower street lined with old houses, their windows dark and blank like empty eyes. The fog seemed to thicken even more here, swallowing the streetlights whole. The world around us became a muted gray tunnel. Then, the air shifted. The sounds dropped, no more footsteps from behind, no distant car engines. Even my own breathing felt too loud, too sharp. I reached out to steady her arm, but my fingers touched only cold, damp air. She was gone. I spun around, heart hammering. The fog pressed in like a living thing. I called her name, voice cracking, but the only reply was silence. I ran back the way we came, shouting, desperate to find her in the swirling gray. Every shadow looked like her. Every whisper sounded like her voice calling back to me. Then I found my phone on the wet pavement, screen cracked and flickering. Her messages were gone. The last text I had from her was a simple "I'm right behind you," sent minutes ago. But she was nowhere. I searched the empty streets for what felt like hours, until the fog finally thinned with the coming dawn. I ended up at the police station, reporting her missing. They took my statement, their faces unreadable. But what unsettled me most was when the officer mentioned something strange. No one else had reported seeing anyone with me that night. The cameras near the cafe showed me alone, walking alone, from start to finish. No one had seen her. No one had heard her. Now, every night, when I close my eyes, I hear that soft whisper again, the one I thought was just the wind. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I feel a cold hand brush past me, a touch that isn't there. I don't know what happened that night. If she was ever real. Or if maybe I was never meant to be found. The police have my name on a missing persons list now, but it's mine they're looking for, because somewhere in that fog, part of me stayed behind. And the world, that night, forgot I was gone.